See.
Thank you for keeping your promise to my brother.
Today you'll learn about the story of Marcus
We
Thompson,
stand with
a
Sergeant
decorated
Rodriguez.
war veteran whose
Those
moment
men
of
deserve the
disrespect
same
at
honor we
Arlington
give these
National
unknown
Cemetery
soldiers.
led to a revelation that shocked an entire nation. Prepare yourself for a narrative full of emotion and unexpected twists. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The morning of November 11th, 2023, dawned crisp and clear over Arlington National Cemetery. Veterans Day ceremonies were about to begin, and thousands of visitors had gathered to honor America's fallen heroes. Among them stood the tomb of the unknown soldier, where the elite tomb guards maintained their sacred vigil with unwavering precision. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez had been walking his post for over 2 hours. His movements were mechanical perfection. 21 steps south, turn and face east for 21 seconds, turn and face north for 21 seconds, then 21 steps north. Each step measured exactly 24 inches, each turn executed with military precision that had been honed through countless hours of training. The crowd watched in respectful silence as Rodriguez performed his duty. Families with small children pointed quietly at the immaculate soldier, whispering explanations about the honor and sacrifice represented by this hallowed ground. Veterans in the crowd stood a little straighter, their own memories of service stirring as they witnessed this timeless display of dedication. But among the sea of respectful faces, one man stood out. Marcus Thompson, 62 years old, wore a faded military jacket adorned with patches from his service in Vietnam. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much, and his eyes held a darkness that seemed to deepen as he watched the ceremony unfold. Thompson had arrived at Arlington that morning with a purpose that no one could have anticipated. In his jacket pocket, he carried a letter, yellowed with age and worn from countless readings. The letter contained information that had haunted him for over 50 years, information that he believed the American people deserved to know. As the ceremony continued, Thompson's agitation grew. He shifted from foot to foot, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Other visitors began to notice his restless behavior, but most assumed he was simply an emotional veteran overwhelmed by the solemnity of the occasion. The official ceremony began with the laying of wreaths by various military officials and government representatives. Each placement was met with respectful applause from the gathered crowd. The honor guard stood at attention, their rifles gleaming in the autumn sunlight, while a military chaplain prepared to deliver the traditional blessing. It was during this moment of peak reverence that Marcus Thompson made his move. Without warning, he pushed through the crowd, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he approached the barriers that separated visitors from the tomb itself. Security personnel immediately noticed Thompson's aggressive approach, but before they could react, he had already crossed into the restricted area. The crowd gasped as Thompson, his face contorted with decades of suppressed rage, approached the ceremonial flag that stood beside the tomb. "You want to honor the unknown?" Thompson shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You want to pretend this country tells the truth about its heroes?" Sergeant Rodriguez, maintaining his professional composure despite the unprecedented interruption, continued his measured pace, but his eyes tracked Thompson's every movement. The other tomb guards, positioned strategically around the memorial, tensed but waited for the proper signal to intervene. Thompson's next action sent shockwaves through the entire ceremony. With deliberate malice, he spat directly onto the folded American flag that rested on the ceremonial stand. The crowd erupted in gasps and angry shouts. Several veterans in the audience began pushing forward, their faces red with indignation. "How dare you!" someone screamed from the crowd. "That's desecration!" But Thompson wasn't finished. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out the weathered letter and held it high above his head. "This flag represents lies," he continued shouting. 53 years I've kept this secret, and I can't do it anymore." Security forces were now moving rapidly toward Thompson, but Sergeant Rodriguez did something that no one expected. Instead of continuing his ceremonial walk or stepping aside for security, he broke protocol entirely. He stopped mid-stride, turned directly toward Thompson, and in a clear, commanding voice that carried across the entire cemetery, he said, "Sir, I need you to explain what you mean by that." The crowd fell silent. Even the approaching security personnel hesitated. In the history of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Guards had never broken their ceremonial duties to engage with a disruptive visitor. The moment was unprecedented, and everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary. Thompson, surprised by Rodriguez's response, lowered the letter slightly. His hands were shaking now. Whether from anger, fear, or the weight of what he was about to reveal, no one could tell. "You really want to know?" Thompson asked, his voice now barely above a whisper, but somehow audible in the complete silence that had fallen over the ceremony. Rodriguez nodded once, his military bearing unchanged despite the broken protocol. "Yes, sir. If you have something to say about the honor of this place, we need to hear it." Thompson looked around at the hundreds of faces staring at him. Veterans, families, children, government officials, all waiting for his next words. The letter in his hands seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. "My name is Marcus Thompson," he began, his voice growing stronger. "I served in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970. I was part of a classified operation that this government has denied for over 50 years. The crowd remained silent, but the tension was palpable. Several news cameras that had been recording the ceremony were now focused entirely on Thompson and the unfolding drama. "This letter," Thompson continued, holding up the document, "was written by my commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, before he died in a helicopter crash in 1971. He gave it to me and made me promise to keep it secret until the time was right." Rodriguez remained perfectly still, his training warring with his human curiosity. The other tomb guards had formed a subtle perimeter, ready to act but clearly waiting for Rodriguez's lead. The security personnel had also stopped their advance, seemingly as captivated by Thompson's revelation as everyone else. "Colonel Mitchell documented everything," Thompson continued, his voice now carrying across the silent cemetery like a confession in a cathedral. "Operation Silent Thunder, that's what they called it. We weren't just fighting the Viet Cong, we were conducting illegal operations in Cambodia and Laos, operations that violated international law and congressional oversight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several government officials in attendance exchanged worried glances, and one man in a dark suit began speaking urgently into a radio. Thompson unfolded the letter with trembling hands. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened to the men who tried to report it. 17 soldiers, good men who believed in doing the right thing, were classified as missing in action when they were actually eliminated by our own forces to keep them quiet. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. A woman near the front began crying, and several veterans looked as though they had been physically struck. "One of those men," Thompson's voice broke, "was my best friend, Corporal Danny Williams. He's listed on the Vietnam Memorial as missing in action, but I know exactly where he died and who killed him, because I was ordered to be part of the execution squad." Sergeant Rodriguez, despite his years of training in maintaining composure under any circumstances, visibly flinched. The weight of Thompson's words seemed to settle over the entire ceremony like a heavy blanket. "Sir," Rodriguez said, his voice steady but filled with a gravity that matched the moment, "are you saying that American soldiers were murdered by their own forces?" Thompson nodded, tears now streaming down his weathered cheeks. 17 good men. And their families were told they died heroically in combat or went missing during operations. The truth is they were killed because they threatened to expose war crimes. The letter in Thompson's hands was now fully unfolded, revealing pages of handwritten text. Colonel Mitchell documented names, dates, locations, and the chain of command that ordered these executions. He gave this to me because he knew they were coming for him too. A reporter in the crowd had managed to get close enough to start recording with her phone, despite the security presence. The footage would later become one of the most viewed videos in internet history. "Why now?" Rodriguez asked, his question echoing what everyone present was thinking. "Why reveal this here at this moment?" Thompson looked around at the tomb of the unknown soldier, his expression shifting from anger to profound sadness. "Because I'm dying," he said simply. "Lung cancer. The doctors give me maybe 3 months, and I realize that if I die with this secret, those 17 men will never get the justice they deserve." He gestured toward the tomb. "These unknown soldiers represent all the men and women who died serving their country. But what about the ones who died because they tried to serve their country with honor? Don't they deserve to be remembered too?" The crowd was completely silent now, the weight of Thompson's revelation settling over everyone present. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, as if nature itself was listening to this confession decades in the making. Rodriguez made a decision that would later be debated in military circles for years to come. He stepped closer to Thompson, close enough that his next words were clearly audible to the crowd, but spoken with the respect due to a fellow veteran. "Sir, if what you're saying is true, then those men deserve to have their story told. But this sacred ground isn't the place for accusations. It's a place for honor." Thompson looked at Rodriguez with surprise, perhaps expecting condemnation rather than understanding. "You believe me? I believe that a dying man doesn't travel to Arlington National Cemetery to lie about his brothers in arms," Rodriguez replied. "But I also believe that if you want justice for those 17 men, there's a better way to honor them than desecrating the flag they died serving under." The crowd watched in fascination as these two soldiers, one active duty, one veteran, faced each other across decades of service and sacrifice. The moment had transcended the original disruption and become something deeper, more meaningful. Thompson wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I've tried the proper channels. I've written to senators, congressmen, the Pentagon. Every letter gets the same response. Classified information, national security, no comment. They've buried this for 53 years, and they'll keep burying it until everyone who knows the truth is dead." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time to make sure the truth doesn't die with you." What happened next shocked everyone present, including Thompson himself. Rodriguez turned to face the crowd and, in his clear, commanding voice, made an announcement that would reverberate through the halls of power in Washington. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, also known as the Old Guard. For the past 6 years, I have had the honor of serving as a tomb guard at this sacred site." The crowd listened intently, unsure where this was leading. "In all my years of service, I have never broken protocol during a ceremony, but today I am witnessing something that transcends protocol. This veteran has brought forward allegations that, if true, represent a betrayal of everything this tomb stands for." Rodriguez paused, looking directly at the news cameras that were now recording everything. "I am officially requesting that the United States Army Criminal Investigation Command open a formal investigation into the allegations made by Marcus Thompson regarding Operation Silent Thunder and the deaths of 17 American soldiers in Vietnam." The crowd erupted. Some people cheered, others shouted in confusion, and several government officials began making urgent phone calls. The ceremony had completely transformed from a routine Veterans Day observance into a moment of historical significance. Thompson stared at Rodriguez in disbelief. "You're risking your career for me, for men you never knew." "I'm not risking my career for you, sir," Rodriguez replied. "I'm honoring my oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. If American soldiers were murdered by their own forces and it was covered up, then that's a domestic enemy of everything we stand for." A colonel who had been observing from the VIP section approached the two men, his face grim. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you are out of line. Return to your post immediately." Rodriguez came to attention but did not move toward his post. "With respect, sir, I believe this matter requires immediate attention from the chain of command." The colonel's face reddened. "Sergeant, you are relieved of duty. Report to your commanding officer immediately." But before Rodriguez could respond, something unexpected happened. Other tomb guards who had been maintaining their positions throughout the entire incident began moving toward Rodriguez and Thompson. One by one, they came to attention beside their fellow guard. "Sir," said Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, the senior guard on duty, "we stand with Sergeant Rodriguez. If there are American soldiers who died for trying to do the right thing, they deserve the same honor we give to these unknown soldiers." The colonel found himself facing not just one insubordinate soldier, but an entire guard detail united in their support for investigating Thompson's claims. The crowd, sensing the historic nature of the moment, began applauding. The applause started slowly, but built to a thunderous ovation that echoed across Arlington National Cemetery. Thompson, overwhelmed by the unexpected support, carefully folded Colonel Mitchell's letter and handed it to Rodriguez. "This belongs to history now," he said. "Make sure those 17 men get the recognition they deserve." Rodriguez accepted the letter with the same reverence he would show to a fallen flag. "Sir, I give you my word that this will reach the proper authorities." The news crews present had captured everything, and within hours, footage of the incident was being broadcast around the world. The hashtag #17Heroes began trending on social media as people demanded answers about Operation Silent Thunder. Within 48 hours, the Pentagon was forced to issue a statement acknowledging that they would review Thompson's allegations. Congressional leaders called for hearings, and veteran advocacy groups rallied behind the cause of the 17 allegedly murdered soldiers. Marcus Thompson, the man who had arrived at Arlington that morning as a dying veteran carrying a terrible secret, found himself at the center of a national conversation about military accountability and the true cost of keeping secrets. 3 weeks later, Thompson received a phone call that changed everything. The Army Criminal Investigation Command had located classified documents that corroborated many of the details in Colonel Mitchell's letter. Operation Silent Thunder had indeed existed, and there was evidence suggesting that several soldiers had died under suspicious circumstances while attempting to report war crimes. The investigation would take months to complete, but preliminary findings supported Thompson's claims. The families of the 17 soldiers were contacted, and for the first time in over 50 years, they learned the truth about how their loved ones had died. Sergeant Rodriguez faced a military tribunal for breaking protocol, but the charges were ultimately dropped due to public pressure and the significance of the information he had helped bring to light. He was quietly transferred to a different unit, but his actions at Arlington became legendary among military personnel who believed in putting honor above orders. On Veterans Day 2024, exactly 1 year after the incident, a special ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. 17 new headstones were dedicated in Section 60, each bearing the name of a soldier who had died not in combat with the enemy, but in service to the truth. Marcus Thompson, despite his terminal diagnosis, lived to see that ceremony. Weakened by chemotherapy, but determined to honor his fallen friends, he was present when each name was read aloud. When they called out Corporal Danny Williams, Thompson saluted with tears streaming down his face. The man who had once spat on a flag in anger had become the catalyst for one of the most significant military justice reforms in decades. His moment of disrespect had led to a greater respect for the truth and for the soldiers who died defending it. As the ceremony concluded, Sergeant Rodriguez, now serving at Fort Myer, approached Thompson one final time. "Sir, you kept your promise to Colonel Mitchell. Those 17 men are finally home." Thompson nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "They were always heroes. It just took 53 years for the rest of the world to know it." The story of Marcus Thompson and the Tomb Guard, who chose truth over protocol, became a defining moment in military history, proving that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is having the courage to challenge the system you've sworn to serve. The colonel found himself facing not just one insubordinate soldier, but an entire guard detail united in their support for investigating Thompson's claims. The crowd, sensing the historic nature of the moment, began applauding. The applause started slowly, but built to a thunderous ovation that echoed across Arlington National Cemetery. Thompson, overwhelmed by the unexpected support, carefully folded Colonel Mitchell's letter and handed it to Rodriguez. "This belongs to history now," he said. "Make sure those 17 men get the recognition they deserve." Rodriguez accepted the letter with the same reverence he would show to a fallen flag. "Sir, I give you my word that this will reach the proper authorities." The news crews present had captured everything, and within hours, footage of the incident was being broadcast around the world. The hashtag #17Heroes began trending on social media as people demanded answers about Operation Silent Thunder. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Pentagon officials scrambled to contain the story, issuing carefully worded statements about reviewing all allegations while maintaining that classified operations couldn't be discussed publicly. But the damage was done. The video of Thompson's confession and Rodriguez's unprecedented response had been viewed millions of times within the first 24 hours. Congressional offices were flooded with calls from constituents demanding investigations. Senator Patricia Williams of California, whose own father had served in Vietnam, held an emergency press conference calling for full transparency. If American soldiers were murdered by their own forces, and it was covered up for over 50 years, then we have failed in our most basic duty to those who serve, she declared. Meanwhile, Thompson found himself thrust into a spotlight he had never wanted. Reporters camped outside his modest apartment in Baltimore, and his phone rang constantly with interview requests. His health was deteriorating rapidly, but he felt compelled to tell his story to anyone who would listen. Within 48 hours of the Arlington incident, the Pentagon was forced to issue a more substantive statement. Defense Secretary Robert Hayes announced that the Army Criminal Investigation Command would conduct a formal review of Thompson's allegations, though he cautioned that many records from that era had been destroyed or lost. Sergeant Rodriguez faced immediate consequences for his actions. He was relieved of duty at Arlington and confined to quarters pending a formal investigation. Military legal experts debated whether his actions constituted insubordination or represented the highest form of military honor. The investigation into Operation Silent Thunder began in earnest 3 weeks after the Arlington incident. A team of military historians, criminal investigators, and intelligence analysts was assembled to review classified documents from the Vietnam era. What they found exceeded even Thompson's allegations. Operation Silent Thunder had been a black operation authorized at the highest levels of military command. Its official purpose was to conduct reconnaissance missions in Cambodia and Laos, but documents revealed that it had evolved into something far more sinister. Units operating under Silent Thunder had been given broad authority to eliminate threats to operational security, including American personnel. The first breakthrough came when investigators located the personal files of Colonel James Mitchell. Hidden in a storage facility in Virginia, the files contained detailed records of 17 separate incidents where American soldiers had been killed to prevent them from reporting war crimes or unauthorized operations. Each case followed a similar pattern. A soldier would witness or participate in an illegal operation, express concerns about reporting it through proper channels, and then die in what appeared to be combat-related incidents. But Mitchell's files revealed the truth. These men had been systematically eliminated by their own forces. As the evidence mounted, public pressure for accountability intensified. Families of the 17 soldiers were contacted by investigators, and for the first time in over 50 years, they learned the truth about how their loved ones had died. Sarah Williams, Danny's younger sister, who was now in her 70s, broke down when investigators told her the real story of her brother's death. "All these years, I thought he died a hero's death in combat," she sobbed. "Now I find out he died because he was too good a man to stay silent about murder." Marcus Thompson's health continued to decline throughout the investigation, but he remained determined to see it through. He testified before a closed congressional hearing, providing additional details that helped investigators piece together the full scope of Operation Silent Thunder. 6 months after the Arlington incident, the Army Criminal Investigation Command released its preliminary findings. The report confirmed that Operation Silent Thunder had existed and that there was credible evidence that American soldiers had been killed to prevent them from reporting illegal activities. The report recommended that the 17 soldiers be posthumously honored and that their families receive full military benefits. New protections were established for military whistleblowers, and mandatory reporting requirements were implemented for suspected war crimes. On Veterans Day 2024, exactly 1 year after Thompson's dramatic revelation, a special ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. 17 new headstones were dedicated in Section 60, each bearing the name of a soldier who had died not in combat with the enemy, but in service to the truth. Marcus Thompson, despite his terminal diagnosis and weakened condition, was present for the ceremony. He had lived longer than doctors expected, sustained by his determination to see his friends properly honored. Wearing his dress uniform for the first time in decades, he stood with the families as each name was read aloud. When they called out Corporal Danny Williams, Thompson saluted with tears streaming down his face. Sarah Williams, now elderly but dignified, placed a hand on Thompson's shoulder. "Thank you for keeping your promise to my brother," she whispered. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been quietly transferred to Fort Myer after the charges against him were dropped, was granted permission to participate in the ceremony. As he helped place the wreaths on each new grave, he reflected on the chain of events that had started with one man's desperate act of defiance. The ceremony concluded with a 21-gun salute and the playing of taps. As the haunting melody echoed across Arlington, Thompson felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for over half a century. 3 months later, Marcus Thompson passed away peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including many he had never met, but whose lives had been touched by his courage to speak the truth. He was buried with full military honors. The story of Marcus Thompson and the tomb guard who chose truth over protocol became a defining moment in military history. proving that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is having the courage to challenge the system you've sworn to serve.